you would feel so much pressure not letting your family down, not wanting to risk any danger, but then equally you're dying to say something to someone.
Yeah.
It must have been awful. And I think Jill did kind of cop for the most mental manipulation.
Oh, yeah, she did. 100%. Yeah, Jill really went through it in this case, didn't she? Just a quick disclaimer, the content presented in this podcast is based on real events and may contain graphic descriptions of violence, crime scenes and other disturbing material. Listener discretion is advised.
Hello, welcome back to Grave Secrets. This is episode 5. We're your hosts. I'm Beth.
I'm Annie, and I can't believe it's episode 5 already.
I know, it's flying.
So today is our second case study, and we're going to be looking at the Pottery Cottage Murders, which is another local case to us, isn't it? It's I think it's about an hour away from where we are right now, but from you,
it's
even closer. Another local case, and it is about a family that was held hostage, and it is a really, really sad case, and that actually resulted in the murders of 4 of the family members, and they were only targeted due to the location of their home, so they had absolutely no ties with the perpetrator, which I think is even more upsetting.
Yeah, it is, because it was literally just down to location, wasn't it? It's not like he'd targeted them based on them as a family.
Yeah, or if they'd done something wrong, not that justifies it, but there was no link whatsoever. This could actually have happened to anyone. Yeah. Which is another really worrying part, isn't it? And it's so sad. I've listened to this case quite a few times, and I've read through the book that was written about this as well.
Yeah.
And it was written actually by the chief superintendent who led the case.
Yes.
I think he was the chief superintendent. I've got his name written down in here. So we will give you the details on the book if you want to have a look and read that and go into a little bit more detail on this case. So we actually really like to do these cases based around the victims, don't we? We like to base
definitely.
a lot of our information around the victims and make sure it's really respectful to them and to the families. But in this case, we do need to do a little bit of a backstory on the perpetrator just to bring it all into perspective to you. So we're not going to focus too much on it, but we're going to give you a bit of a brief overview. So these murders took place between the 12th and 14th of January in 1977 in the Eastmoor area of Chesterfield.
I can't believe that this ordeal actually went on for 55 hours.
Yeah, so 55 hours, what, three and a bit days?
Yeah, absolutely
for the
horrendous.
family. It is harrowing to think that they were held hostage for this amount of time.
Because we talk about the murders, obviously we know that unfortunately they were killed, but there was all of this time prior to that.
Where the family must have been so scared.
Yeah, and I think in the end they just kind of resigned themselves to the fact that they were in this situation. It's as if they all just kind of shut down. You have fight or flight, but then you also have fight, flight and fright, where you just freeze effectively. And I think that's what happened in this case.
And I think a little bit later into the case, we'll also talk about, I know we can't give what exactly we would do in this situation, but what you think you would do in this situation, or what you like to think you would do in this situation. Now, knowing the whole story like we do, what would we have done maybe differently along the way? But like we said, hopefully we're never going to be in this situation to test this out for real. But you can never say there's a right or wrong for anyone to do, because you just don't know in this situation.
No, you don't know how you're going to react.
You would do, especially when your family's at risk.
I think the family plays a big part in it, doesn't
Definitely, if it's just you,
it's completely different.
100%. So the little bit of a backstory we're going to give you is on a guy called William Hughes, who will be known as Billy throughout this. So he was born on the 8th of August 1946, and his upbringing, it said he wasn't really interested in an education, wasn't really bothered at school, was a little bit naughty, but I do think that's sort of like a lot of
most
people.
Kids.
A lot of kids are not
difficult.
really bothered, are they, about school? And it doesn't mean that you're going to go on to do nothing.
No, but they'd mentioned like antisocial behaviour, didn't they?
Yeah.
And again, I think like for a lot of kids, Especially if there's something like undiagnosed, like a lot of the time now it seems to be like ADHD or conditions like that. It's not that they want to misbehave, it's just that no one's really fathomed out how to deal with them as a person.
Yeah.
Because the way that we teach, the way that teaching and the curriculum works doesn't factor in different learning styles, really.
No, it doesn't at all,
Yeah.
So, I mean, back in the 70s as well, I don't think there was any awareness around things like ADHD, and you were probably just classed as a naughty child
kid,
to start with. So his school life wasn't the best, and he did get into petty crime at a really early age. I think his first offence was for theft, and he was only 14 at the time, so you can sort of see how he's starting to go down the wrong path. So with the antisocial behaviour and then with the theft, I feel like it is slowly escalating at 14 years old.
And you don't really know how the family reacted, do you? We don't know a lot about whether he was reprimanded or whether it was just that's classic Billy.
As far as I know, his family background, there wasn't any like cause for concern or anything going on in the home which caused this behaviour. So, you can't really... It's normally, you think, when you look into the background of a perpetrator, you think there may be a trigger. It could be something to do with the childhood, and you can slowly sort of work it back, can't you? And think, well, this happened.
That might have had an effect.
In this case, there wasn't really a lot to work it back to. So he was first arrested at the age of 14, and because of his criminal behaviour, they actually sent him away to Borstal in Kent, which is a juvenile detention centre.
Yeah, and that's kind of the worst one, isn't it? It's the most intense.
Yeah. And
you don't just get sent to Borstal for petty theft. You have to be seen as a bit of a danger as a young
and probably
child.
A repeat offender as well. And Borstal, for those that don't know, is sort of the school/detention centre that is run by the prison service. So it's meant to be like a rehabilitation for young offenders, and I don't know how many of them go to Borstal and get rehabilitated. I've not really looked into that side of it.
No, I don't know actually.
So that might be interesting to...
But it's also a case of kind of trying to deter them from then having to go to prison. It's meant to be a bit of a deterrent, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like the last port of call before you think, right, okay, I'm going to sort out this before it goes too far in adulthood.
I feel like it could be a shock factor, because if you're going somewhere like that, I don't know about you, but if I was going somewhere like that at that age, that would scare me.
Yeah.
I would be like, no, I definitely do not want to do this. I need to sort my life out.
You're not getting
that
a
would
6 weeks holiday, are you? Like you would do at school.
Yeah. So throughout Billy's life, he was in and out of prison, and he actually gained the nickname Mad Billy at some point. I'm not sure exactly what he did to...
I think it was threatening other prisoners. I think he would basically just flip. So he seemed charming and nice, but then he would just flip over little things. So I think it was both with officers and with just inmates.
People in general, yeah.
It's actually
it's quite scary that as soon as he doesn't get his own way, there's just a switch and he seems to go, doesn't he?
Yeah, because you can't control something like that either. Like there's a lot of work that looks into like domestic violence relationships and stuff like that, and all of the research says that you could be doing the right thing one day and then you could do exactly the same thing the next day, but it'd be wrong.
Yeah, there's no pattern.
No.
Yeah.
So I think
that's
what's
difficult,
especially dangerous in this case.
So although he was in and out of prison, I know that his dad did try to get him help with jobs. So his dad got him into work, and then he would not be able to hold a job down. He would go in for a little bit, he would kick off, something would happen, he would lose that job. And in the end, I think his dad stopped getting him these jobs because it was also making his dad look bad. Because he was saying, can you take on my son who's been in and out of prison all his life?
Yeah, but don't worry, he won't let you down this time.
Yeah, he's a changed person. And then he does the exact same thing again and lets his dad down. So I think it got to a point where... And
I think that shows you quite a lot about Billy's personality, because again, most people would have some level of guilt for letting...
you don't want to let your family down. You don't want to let, especially if your dad's got you into a good situation, what you've not been in before, you'd think, I don't want to let him down. I don't want to disappoint him.
No, but it seems like he's just got complete disregard, really, for other people.
Yeah, and I think that's apparent throughout this case.
Yeah.
His disregard for everyone.
His disregard, and also just the fact that he's more important. It's this sense of importance that he's got.
So in 1972, he actually married Jean Naden, and she already had a daughter. And he then went on to move in with her, and they went on to have a daughter together as well. But that relationship was abusive.
Yeah.
There was infidelity on Billy's side.
Mm-hmm.
And I think she pretty much went through it with that. It wasn't very nice to her daughter. I know he was arrested once for hitting her daughter.
Yeah, and I think, again, people say, well, why would she have stayed if...
Yeah.
You know, he was hitting her daughter.
It's control.
It's control, yeah. And something that I think will be a common theme throughout a lot of the cases that we look at is this element of being stuck in it. By the time you realise it's too late then.
Yeah.
And you don't want to put your children in that situation, but equally you have to fathom a safe way of getting out of it.
Yeah.
And that's not always clear when you're
And
in
then
it.
by this time, she'd already had a child of her own with him as well. So she's now got 2 children.
Yeah. And you don't want to, as much as it might be chaotic and it might not be stable, you don't want to lose that family unit. There's a lot of people
that hang on to
to that unit, and I can understand it if you've not had it before, especially.
Yeah, and maybe the like stigma that comes with being, especially in the 70s, maybe of being like a single mom, being on your own. You've got 2 kids, you've got 2 different dads to the kids.
Yes.
There were probably a lot more stigma around that than what there is nowadays, because you know I wouldn't even bat an eyelid now at that
life
situation.
Happens, doesn't it?
Yeah. The only way that Jean managed to get away from him is because he ended up serving a 3.5-year prison sentence, and that was for assaulting 2 police officers.
Which again is just, that could have been quite a small situation. It didn't have to escalate to a 3.5-year stint in prison, because effectively what happened is his car got pulled over, he got stopped by the police, and they then found drugs in the car.
Yeah, but it wasn't drugs, it was pharmacy drugs.
Yeah, so you could have just said, sorry, officer.
Yeah, like, oh, yeah.
And then, you know, be on your way. But instead, he just brutally attacked these 2 officers.
Yeah, I think he was with his brother at that point as well. So there doesn't seem to be anything before now about saying his brother was involved in a lot of crime as well. So maybe his younger brother had sort of tagged along with him. And was something that I read was saying that the police officers, when they opened the boot of his car, they thought he'd robbed a pharmacy. Because there was that many drugs in the back of the car. So maybe he thought, I'm not going to get away with this. I might as well do it and get in even more trouble, basically, because he was looking at, like, obviously he got 3.5 years, but he wouldn't have been looking at 3.5 years for the drugs from the pharmacy, would he? I would have thought that would have been a less offence than obviously assaulting a police officer. So while he was in prison serving the 3.5-year sentence, he actually met his next girlfriend. I don't know if she was right into him.
Yeah, maybe. The amount of people that get into relationships whilst in prison. I can't get a relationship in general.
Never mind in prison.
Never mind.
So she was called Teresa O'Doherty, and she actually lived, I think, further up towards Chesterfield, because at this time he's serving his sentence. I think he was in Leicester. Wasn't it? HMP Leicester.
Yeah.
So he's kept in contact with his girlfriend through this prison time. Obviously met her in prison, kept in contact, and I think they did they end up getting married when he was in prison as well. I feel like
I didn't see that.
Couldn't remember if he'd actually married her, but when he got out of prison, he then went to live with obviously his new girlfriend.
Abandoned Jean and his children.
Yeah.
Stepchild and his child, just abandoned them completely
and disappeared with his new girlfriend.
Yeah.
So this was in 1973 when he served the 3.5-year prison sentence. So he was out like halfway through 76.
Yeah.
And then on August the 21st, 1976, so he's not even been out very long at all, he goes out to a nightclub and he gets talking to a couple at a bar. And this was really scary because this just happens all the time.
I know.
We go out and we talk to random people.
Yeah, you do.
Not as in like, it's just like a friendly thing. If someone stood at the bar on their own,
you just have a chat.
You'd be like, oh, you're all right. Like, make small talk with them.
Yeah.
And I think this is what this couple were doing, just like had a little chat with him at the bar. And then when they left the venue, they started walking home and the park was actually closed, but there was a shortcut through the park for the couple to get home. And they ended up jumping the fence and going through the park.
And I think when you're in a couple as well,
Yeah.
there's just not that level of, we would probably, if we were walking home late at night, we'd probably have a greater level of concern
We'd be
just
more
because we're two
cautious.
women.
Yeah.
But I think if you are in a couple, it might sound stereotypical, but if you're with your other half, you do
If
have
I'm
a
with
natural...
Jay, I wouldn't think twice about doing something like that because
No,
he's
you have
there
a
with
natural
me.
level of safety with that person.
Yeah, so Billy Hughes actually followed the couple from the nightclub into the park, which was obviously deserted because it was closed.
Yeah.
And he ended up attacking the male with a brick and then dragging the female down to the riverside and raping her at knife point.
Yeah, horrendous.
So another horrendous crime that is committed.
And she will have witnessed her other half getting hit over the head with a brick as well, which is bad enough to watch someone get assaulted.
And then you get sexually assaulted yourself is horrendous.
Yeah.
So when the police arrested him for that, he actually said that the male had started a fight with him. He'd whacked him with a brick to stop him.
In self-defense.
Yeah, in self-defense.
Yeah.
And then while the male was on the floor bleeding, I'm guessing, from his head, the female had turned round to Billy Hughes and said, I want to have sex with you. Will you come down to here and have sex?
Of course.
So he said he did have sex, but it was consensual. Obviously, the female said otherwise and said what had actually really happened.
But it just goes to show that he just have this level of self-importance where he thinks he's just going to be able to say, oh, no, it was her that saw me do this awful thing and then she wanted to have sex with him. And like the officers would believe it, equally like she would say, yes, that's true, that's what happened. It's just this
crazy,
air of arrogance that he has.
It is, and he thinks everyone's just going to do what he says. He's set the story down, he expects the girl to go along with it.
Yeah.
And it must have been such a scary situation for her in general, let alone the guy, because then you would sort of blame yourself as well that he's got hit and then that happened to his girlfriend. I'm guessing that was quite a strain on their relationship.
Yeah, completely. And again, it might have been a case of one of them probably started the conversation in the pub or in the nightclub with Billy, and then they'd have
feel
felt
bad.
guilty.
Yeah, it's horrible. So when Billy was arrested for that offence, he was taken to HMP Leicester on remand, and he was actually categorised as a Cat B prisoner for his offences. So the paperwork that came from the police station was wrong, and he should have been categorised as a Category A prisoner because
obviously,
he should have been
they're all violent offences.
The most dangerous prisoner. And because of this, this started off a whole new chain of events, didn't it? Because of the categorisation. So as a Cat B inmate, you are actually allowed to work within the prison building. And Billy Hughes was then allowed to work in the prison kitchen. And he shouldn't have been. Definitely shouldn't have been. After violent offences like that.
Yeah.
He shouldn't have been allowed to be anywhere near, obviously, around weapons.
No, when we look at it now, it's like, why did that happen? But like you say, it was just this clerical error.
That started and it just bulldozed through, didn't it?
Horrendous.
And you've got to remember as well, this was back in the 70s where the technology and stuff isn't quite as it is now, whereas today you'd be programmed, you'd be checked into custody, it'd be logged on a computer, it would be passed on to all these people, whereas back then it was probably written down on a piece of paper
it was just
and passed.
a bit of paper.
So anyone could have written that down wrong. So he works in the prison kitchen, and they soon realise that a 7.5-inch blade has gone missing from the prison kitchen. So they do the searches on the cells, and they can't find it anywhere. And you can guess who's got it.
Yeah.
So Billy has got it, and he actually hid it in his, deep inside his mattress.
And I think, again, this shows it's always, even though his attacks are violent and seem quite sporadic, they seem quite spur of the moment in terms of he just decides that he's going to attack someone. But I think there is a level of thought behind... Premeditation,
because this whole case, some of it is pure, chance and spur of the moment, but this whole bit we're going to get to next has got to be premeditated.
Yeah, and attacking that couple, he followed them out.
Yeah.
It's not like they were around the smoking area, around the back, and then he got into this.
Or they were in an argument and he did something in the heat of the moment.
Yeah, he seems to seek out trouble as well as it just happening.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. So in the time that he was in HMP Leicester, he actually made phone calls to his girlfriend Teresa, and the phone calls became increasingly horrible.
Violent,
Violent over the phone. But he still wanted Teresa to turn up to his court case and give a character witness when he'd been horrible to her.
Yeah. And I saw as well that he actually went back to his first wife and asked for a recommendation.
The audacity.
Yeah, asked for a recommendation for her. I know I've abandoned you, but I'd quite like to get out of prison.
See, this is how he thinks people would just come back to him.
Yes. Yeah.
So
no.
Yeah, anyway, Teresa said no to this, and she actually broke up with him. She hung up the phone, and that was that. So now we're going to move on to the 12th of January 1977, and this is the escape that I've labelled this as.
Yes. Yeah.
So Hughes was actually going to be driven from HMP Leicester all the way to Chesterfield Magistrates Court, and this was for a remand hearing. And when someone's going to be driven to court, normally it's by the police officers.
Yeah, this is mad to me. When I saw this,
it was really, really bad weather. There was actually a snowstorm, and they decided to transport him via a taxi. I'm not sure if this is a regular protocol, because I don't think I've heard of this before.
No,
but then again, I've never been involved in this side of it.
No.
So he wasn't just putting a taxi on his own and sent up the motorway. No. He was accompanied by 2 police officers. So he was to be transported, and he was actually handcuffed to one of the police officers. So we've got Donald Sprintall and Kenneth Simmons, and he was handcuffed to Kenneth Simmons, and Donald was sat in the front of the car. And then obviously you've got the taxi driver in the driving seat.
Yeah.
So they set off on this trip from Leicester up to Chesterfield, which, if you're not familiar with the area, is about a 55-mile drive. So it's quite far in these treacherous conditions on the road as well, and up the M1. And they set off, I think they said, just after 9 in the morning. And when they were on the motorway, then Billy decided that he was desperate for a toilet break.
When we've got kids in like colleges and stuff, we're like, come on. There's 15 minutes to break.
Yeah, they're like, no, I'm desperate. So I imagine him being like a child in the back of that car.
Yes.
And I think eventually he said something to the police officers like, well, if you don't let me go, I'm just going to do it here.
Yeah.
So they said, right, we better pull over at the next service station. And it was between Junction 25 and Junction 26 on the M1. So they actually pulled over and took him into the bathroom, obviously unhandcuffed him, but they stood outside the bathroom stall while he went in, and they heard him going to the toilet, came back out, handcuffed him back up, and got back in the car again.
And again, from what we know of him, he does seem like he can be quite polite when he wants to be. So I'd imagine that he'd, have thanked them for letting him stop, and then they'd have carried on.
They did say he made small talk as well on the way up, like talking about the weather. He didn't come across as like a horrible person.
No, not like this violent person that we know him to be. And also, we don't actually know how well they knew him as a prisoner. They might have just been the officers that were assigned to him without having met him before. So I can imagine that if you are meeting him for the first time, he must come across
as being all right.
Yeah.
So as they got back onto the M1 to continue the journey up to Chesterfield, Billy Hughes had actually concealed the knife from his cell in his boot. And then when he'd gone into the bathroom, he'd then moved the knife from his boot into an easy access location. And it just shows the chain of events from not having that paperwork done correctly in the first place, because if the paperwork was done correctly, he would have been a category A prisoner, which it showed is dangerous, and he would have had a strip search before getting in the car.
Yeah.
Whereas this time, because he's category B, he had a pat down.
Yeah.
And they didn't check his shoes.
Well, you wouldn't.
They didn't check his boots. So he'd concealed the knife in the boot and then managed to move it to an easy access location while he was in the bathroom. So now he's got access to the knife while he's in the car with 2 police officers and a taxi driver.
And they've probably got their guard down at this point, They've got out of the car and been in a service station, and he hasn't created any kind of kerfuffle or a situation. So they're probably thinking, oh, we're home and dry now.
Yeah.
We're nearly there.
Yeah. So back on the road, Hughes was actually sat behind Sprintall, the officer, and he reached over and actually stabbed him.
Yeah, in the back of the neck.
The back of the neck, and there was like a gaping hole. And afterwards, the officer said, like, when he put his hand there to stop the bleeding, all he could feel is a big gash in the back.
Yeah.
So when he'd done that, then obviously everyone in the car is shocked. The officer's covered in blood, and then Simmons, who was sat next to him, had no choice but to obviously unhandcuff him, and he also got slashed across the jaw and the hand.
Yeah.
So then, you know, you haven't got a choice if he's just stabbed someone in the back of the neck in front of you.
Yes.
But you can now imagine both police officers are bleeding, and Billy Hughes is now not restrained.
Has control.
And then you've got to take into consideration the taxi driver.
I know.
The poor taxi driver. He's just took on a job thinking, oh, this is a safe run up to, you know, with a Category B prisoner. He's probably done it before. Because if that is what they do, they've probably got certain like taxi drivers to do it. So the poor taxi driver was then held at knife point and basically had to continue driving for quite a while.
Yeah.
So the taxi driver continued wherever Billy said. They came off the motorway, and then when they found an area that was quite secluded, Billy then ordered the 2 police officers and the taxi driver to get out of the taxi.
And then just hijacked the taxi.
Yeah, and he told them to lay face down and not turn round until the car had gone. So by this point, both police officers are injured.
Yeah.
And bleeding.
Yeah.
The only person that could talk was actually, in fact, the taxi driver. And Billy's sped off in the car with the radio in it. So they've got no form of contact. Yeah. So at this point, they had to try and find the nearest pub, which I think was the Red Lion. And imagine those 3 turning up.
And also
in blood
in these conditions as well.
In treacherous conditions.
Because it was really heavy snow. It was horrendous. There were a lot of people that just were avoiding the roads completely.
Yeah.
So it's not like, you know, an easy walk anyway.
Yeah. It's absolutely crazy. So these 3 went into the pub. They then alerted the police, and by the time they alerted the police, it was just after 10 a.m. They only set off at 9 a.m. Yeah, it's not even an hour, and all this has happened. Yeah. So the police were left abandoned, but managed to raise the alarm, and then obviously the search party could then go out and help the officers, for one, and get them to hospital, and thankfully they survived.
Yes.
And they could give a good witness testimony as to what has happened, and the poor taxi driver must have been scared to death, but he will have got a good witness statement
definitely.
as well. And it's not like they didn't know who he was.
Yeah.
You know, the police will have known who he was.
Yeah.
They knew what journey they were on. So I feel like you know who you're looking for straight away. So it's a pretty good start on the search.
They say that there's a golden hour, don't they? Which isn't just an hour, but it's that first kind of stage of an investigation when you're gathering as much information as possible. And like you say, they'd have probably been off to quite a good start because they've already had a lot of that information.
Yeah, they know a lot of his background as well.
Yeah.
And a little bit further down the road, because of this such bad driving conditions, Hughes actually crashed the car.
Yeah.
And then escaped on foot. But again, we're in the middle of a snowstorm in really bad weather, and you know, we're both from quite a rural area. And when it snows out there, you wouldn't even, like, sometimes I wouldn't even be able to get off my drive.
No, it's horrendous. And
it's
it was
really bad.
Near Chatsworth House, wasn't it, that it crashed into this wall, which again is usually, you might have heard of Chatsworth, it's quite a popular area. It's really beautiful. But because of the conditions, there was no one that had witnessed this crash because no one else was on the road.
And it's really like countryside areas. It's country roads, isn't it? There's lots of fields around it. And you just think, where could he possibly go in that situation? So now we're going to move on to the main part of the case, and we're going to talk about Pottery Cottage. And this will all fit together. Everything we've said so far will all come together, and you'll be like, oh, yeah.
It's unbelievable that, like, this is the main part. You would think for most people that the stuff we've already talked about
was the case.
Yes. But no.
And I was doing a little practice run yesterday, and we went for a walk, and I was telling Jay about the case, and we got like to these bits, and he was like, oh my God, that happened. Oh my God, that happened. And I said, oh, just wait. This isn't even the main part of the case yet.
No, it's horrendous.
There's so much of a build-up, and this is why we had to give you so much of a background on Billy, didn't we? Just to make it all fit into perspective.
Yeah.
So Pottery Cottage was an 18th century pottery barn that had been converted into 3 houses. So there was someone living in the end house, and then there was a family that was living in the other two parts of the barn. So we've got a large country house that was owned by Arthur and Amy Minton, and they lived with their daughter. So we've got Gillian Moran, her husband Richard Moran, and then their adopted daughter Sarah as well. So we've got 5 people living. It wasn't sort of a house all in one. It was divided into 2, so they had the separate spaces, but you could easily access through it was like an annex, wasn't it? Yeah. So you could easily access. So I think that the granddaughter Sarah could easily go between the grandparents' house and the parents, which would have been quite nice. That's quite lovely, isn't it? So Arthur and Amy actually married in 1931 and had 2 daughters. One of them was Gillian. The other one was Barbara. In 1936, though, Arthur Minton was in a motorbike accident, quite a bad accident, and actually lost his leg, so he had a prosthetic leg. So they'd been through their fair share of trauma, to be fair, as a family, without any of this happening. So the Mintons actually ran a grocery shop in the West Midlands, and then when Arthur was ready to retire, that's when they decided to relocate. So they came up to Pottery Cottage, which is in Derbyshire. And so Gillian and Richard Moran, they got married and they realised that they couldn't have children. I think it was about 6 years in, so they decided to adopt Sarah, which I think is quite nice.
Lovely. Really gorgeous.
And at this time, I can't remember how old Sarah is. Was she around 10?
Yeah.
10 years old around this time. So she actually knew what was going on. I feel like at 10, you sort of
you've got an
pick
awareness
up on stuff, don't you? Quite easy.
Yeah. I think even as young as like 3 and 4, children are a lot more aware than people often give them credit for, which I think is why it's so important to be honest where you can with kids.
Yeah.
Because even if they're not feeling it directly or seeing it,
they're probably picking up on it.
Yeah, on your emotions and things like that.
Yeah, you've got to be careful. But just a little bit of a background on Jill here. So they were saying that she was so determined when she was younger. She was so motivated. She went to secretarial school, and she really wanted to learn to drive.
Yes.
So Arthur, her dad, taught her to drive.
Yeah.
And then it was while she managed to get a job driving for a company, which was at the time quite a high paid job.
Yeah, definitely. And probably not a job that a lot of women would have done at the time.
So at that time.
No.
That's where she actually met her husband Richard while she was delivering something to him.
Because again, it was like you'd go to secretarial school, wouldn't you, if you were a woman, and you'd then get a job as a typist.
Yeah, so she did that, but then she also got the driving, so she could get the better job on the side as well. So I think it just shows throughout all this, when we tell you more about what actually happened, this just still sums Jill up, doesn't it, really?
Resilience.
Yeah, she was very resilient, very determined, and I think she did a really good job throughout this.
Yeah, completely.
So we're now on the 12th of January where the main event started to take place. So Amy was actually in the kitchen and she was preparing tea for the rest of the family like she normally did. And she was preparing the veg, and Arthur was always also in the house as well. And she noticed the back door open. And she thought, oh, someone must be home from work early. Like, there's Richard that lives in the house, there's Sarah, there's her daughter Jill.
Yeah.
Someone's probably just come home early. And
equally, they're in quite a, it's not secluded, but it's only a tiny, tiny village, isn't it? There's not a lot of people around.
And the door was always unlocked.
Yeah.
So it just shows what type of a place you just leave your door unlocked. They only had 2 neighbours, didn't they? You know, they only had 2 people living next door to them. And as she turned round to see who it was, she was really, really shocked to see a man standing there who she didn't recognise, who, in fact, we now know is Billy Hughes. He was actually armed with an axe. So he'd trekked across from crashing his car 4 miles and 2 hours over the countryside, over the moors, and found himself at Pottery Cottage.
And again, he'd gone like the difficult way, hadn't he? He'd not gone the way that it was likely. Well, effectively, the police came up with what they thought might have happened, and he'd just gone in completely the other direction, again, over moorlands and in treacherous conditions.
So the police originally thought that he would have gone towards one of the main roads in a snowstorm. Like, you probably wouldn't go out towards the moors, which is what he did.
So it's just going to be so open and awful conditions.
Yeah, and the police were really, really worried about his first wife and his daughter and her daughter. And they actually put her into a safe house and they had all the police. They lived in Blackpool. They had all the Blackpool police on standby because they thought from there he would have found his way to the main road and he would have gone towards her to do something to her.
Yeah.
But in fact, he went the total opposite way across the moors and into Pottery Cottage. But before he got to Pottery Cottage, he went into the shed and found something else to arm himself with. And he came out with an axe that he'd found in the garden shed. So imagine just being stood making tea in your kitchen and someone walks in with an axe and you'd never seen them before in your life.
And he would have looked pretty dishevelled at that point as well.
It would have been freezing after going across the moors. I'm surprised he wasn't like blue in the face.
And again, so we've got Amy and Arthur, and they're an older couple. They're retired by this point.
Yeah.
So again, it's
they're
not,
in the 70s, weren't they?
Yeah. So, you know, it's not just a case of cooking tea and Arthur jumps up and tries to defend them.
Yeah.
They're an
and
older
he's got
couple.
one leg.
Yeah.
He's got a prosthetic leg. Yeah.
They're an older couple.
So he actually explained to Amy that he was wanted by the police and he asked who lived there. He wanted a description of the house. She had to then explain to him that she lived with her daughter's husband Richard, and their granddaughter. He wanted to know what time they were going to be home. But at this point, I think Arthur will have been thinking, who's she talking to in there?
Yes,
Like, you can overhear a bit of it and think, well...
He was in the other part of the annex, I think, wasn't he?
Who's sort of come round. And as Arthur came in to find out, you know, what had happened, who she was talking to, he thought someone might be lost. The car might have broke down. They've come for help. And as he walked into the kitchen, he got hit by Billy Hughes and ended up on the floor, and it knocked him out. But to do that to an old man anyway, there was actually no need for that.
No, there wasn't. He could have just said, sit there, I'm in charge.
I've got an axe, sit there, and I'm guessing that Arthur probably would have.
Yeah.
I know a bit later on they do say, like, Arthur was probably the more stubborn one in himself. And he was the man of the house, so he was probably the more likely one to try and put up a fight.
Yeah.
But when he came round from being knocked out, they put him on a chair and they had to tell him, look, this guy is wanted by the police, and relay the story to him.
Yeah, because again, Billy had it basically said, don't worry, you know, as long as you do as I say, I'm not going to hurt you. But I am wanted by the police and I have just attacked 2 police officers.
Yeah.
So he's just contradicting himself all the time because he's saying, you know, don't worry, I'm not going to hurt you unless I have to. But then equally, he's just hit Arthur over the head and we already know that he's attacked 2 officers.
Yeah. Yeah, he's not making a very good reputation for himself here, is he? And also, throughout this, a lot of people said he was very... fictional with the stuff that he said. So he would tell them a story, but the story would change over time. Every time he told the story, so he told the story to Amy about him being wanted by the police. By the time he told the story to Arthur, like 10 minutes later, he'd already changed parts of the story and made it sound worse. And later down the line, you can just tell he says the same story, but it's changed every single time. He's a compulsive liar, really, yeah.
And I think as well, that shows this level of control because he's tweaking it probably to fit whoever he's talking to.
Yes.
He's going to probably make it sound worse to Arthur because he wants to assert that authority and this level of strength and violence.
Yeah.
Whereas with Amy, he probably wants to get on her good side and say, don't worry about it, just do as you're told.
Yeah, yeah.
So it is quite manipulative.
Yeah, definitely. So Billy told the couple that he needed to lay low just until later in the evening, until he could manage to make his escape. And he got the couple to show him around the entire house, so he knew where all the rooms were, which is strange.
Yeah, it must be such an odd... Like, there's so much of this case that's just mad, but there are certain points and you just think, I cannot imagine being in that situation.
Yeah.
Just like, oh, and here's the bathroom.
Yeah, and here's the main bedroom.
And is he still
this is where we have
holding
food.
his axe now?
You're walking around with the axe.
So obscure.
So they did show him around the house, and he actually disconnected the phone lines while they were going round. So he didn't cut them, but he unplugged the phone lines so no one could get through. And Jill was actually the first to arrive home, so that was just after 3 p.m. So Amy was told that she needed to go outside, calm her daughter down and tell her daughter the story before she came in to meet Billy, so that she wasn't panicking and wasn't going to do anything.
Scene.
Going to do anything out of the ordinary. But they were, as Jill came to the kitchen door was locked.
Which is strange.
The gate was open in the garden.
Yeah.
And as she was coming through the door, apparently Jill was saying, why have you got this door locked? You never lock this door. And why are the gates open? The dog's going to get out of the gate. Okay. And like she came in and she was like 100 mile an hour telling them like what they're doing wrong.
Yeah.
And, you know, Amy just had to say to her, right, just stop. Like, this is what's going on. So she told Jill what was going on and brought her through again to meet Billy. But at this point, he'd not really done anything too extreme. I mean, he'd hit Arthur, but to the women, he'd not done anything.
No.
And he wasn't acting actively, aggressively all the time.
He wasn't. And it did, Jill said that he seemed quite calm. Yeah. He was quite calm as this was going on, and obviously had the forethought to think, like, you know, Amy, you go and talk to Jill, you go calm her down. There was a lot of calm and forethought at this point.
Yeah.
But I think as things escalated, it was probably due to the time that had elapsed.
Yeah.
Because then there wasn't much time, was there, between Jill coming home and Sarah, the daughter, coming
soon.
back. She came back about past, I think.
Yeah, because she was at school, so school had sort of finished, and then she came back on the school bus. So Sarah was actually the next person to arrive home. But Jill said that she had a chat with Billy, and she said, can I tell Sarah that your car's broken down and you're waiting for a tow?
Yeah.
Because we don't want to worry her, we don't want to scare her, we don't want her to be in this situation. And he actually said yes to that, didn't he?
He did. And like we say, kids pick up on quite a lot of things. I think initially Sarah didn't pick up on anything.
No.
Because she was sewing on the kitchen floor.
She's got like a little sewing kit.
And
so
she obviously
helped her. Yeah,
so she obviously
needles.
didn't feel threatened,
Yeah.
and couldn't tell straight away that something was going on.
Yeah, but then I think she said at one point, "Oh, this guy seems nice, but why is he walking around the house on his own?"
Yeah,
and that's what set her off, because you wouldn't walk around someone else's house if you're just waiting for a car.
Yeah.
You'd sit, wouldn't you, in
Just
the
sit
living
and
room
wait.
and like,
Yeah.
I wouldn't go into anyone's house really and start walking randomly around anywhere. Especially someone you don't know. So I think that's where she probably picked up and thought, this is a little bit a little bit off. There's probably something
and
going
him
on.
Pacing around makes sense, because again, Jill said that the closer it got to Richard coming home, the more irate he seemed to get, and it was as if he was worried.
Yeah, I think because Arthur had caused him a little bit of a, grief, stood up to him a little bit.
Yeah.
I think he thought, well, if Arthur's like that, the other man of the house, Richard, is younger, stronger, and probably will give me the most trouble. So I think his anxiousness was rising as it got close to the time, because he thought, what am I actually going to do?
Be up against.
What am I going to be up against when he comes home? He did actually reconnect the phone lines at this point, because he thought, if there's a snowstorm, people are going to be ringing up to see if they're okay, to check on them.
Yeah.
And he didn't want anything to look strange. So if they didn't reply,
someone might come and check on them.
Someone could come and say, are they okay? Because with Amy and Arthur being an elderly couple, even though they've got the son-in-law and daughter living with them, the neighbours could easily just come and check, couldn't they?
And I think Richard was working away in Manchester, wasn't he? He was over in Manchester. So again, if neighbours know that, often small villages, little towns, you know what's going on with people.
Yeah.
And if they knew that,
someone's out of the routine, or
Richard
someone's
and
away.
Jill were out at work. If they got stranded, then they probably did think that potentially they could be on their own.
Yeah. So next to arrive home was Richard, and he didn't get home until about 6 p.m. But by this point, I think Billy had sort of built himself up that much about it. He didn't know really what to do. So he took a knife and he put the knife to Jill.
Yeah.
And when Richard came in, he said, right, this is the deal. And
the first thing, imagine again, it's like preparing the vegetables, isn't it? Imagine you walk in from work, you've had a stressful day, and the first thing you see is your wife being held at knife point.
Yeah. So I think that was another control thing, so that Richard physically couldn't do anything. And I think this was a really good thing that Richard thought on his feet here straight away and said, here's my car keys, there's a full tank of petrol, take my car and you can make your getaway.
Yeah.
You can escape in my car. You can go.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
And he said no.
Yeah.
So I think at that point, if you'd already been trekking across for 2 hours, you'd already crashed a car and been driving in it, you'd assaulted 2 police officers, you want to get as far away from the area as possible. So even if I wasn't going to get very far, Richard had got back from Manchester in his car.
Yeah.
So his car
It
must have
can't
been
be-
capable
Yes. Yeah.
of getting out of the way. So if that was me thinking as a criminal,
Yeah.
I would have took the car and gone. So I think Billy liked being in control of the family and being in control of these people and them doing what he said and them fearing him in a way and sort of being scared of him.
Yeah, it wasn't about the getaway. Despite the fact that he says he was just lying low to avoid, I don't think it was about getting out of the situation.
Yeah.
I think, like you say, it was about controlling any situation he's in.
Yeah, because he said he wanted to lie low until the evening, didn't he, to Arthur and Amy when he first got there. By this time, it's 6 o'clock when Richard comes home. That is the evening, and you've got to get away.
Yeah.
Like,
but you go, no,
he wanted to be there.
Yeah.
Which is even more scary, and it must be horrible for the family thinking, right, we've only got until this evening, and he'll be out of the way, and he'll go, and he won't hurt us if we do what he says. He actually told the story about the police officers, but he said, they didn't do what I said.
Which is why I hurt them.
I could have killed them, but I didn't. I just hurt them.
Yeah.
So at this point, they just had his word for it, didn't they, really? But by the time it got a little bit later, Billy Hughes decided to tie all the family up, and bind them, put them in all different rooms of the house so that everyone was separated.
And again, that's really well thought out, isn't it? You don't put them in different rooms unless you have a specific intent, I don't think.
Yeah.
Because you would think that you would have easier control if they're all in one place and you can make sure that you can see them all.
Yeah.
And have them fearing together.
I think he was worried about what they were going to come together and do.
Yeah.
So if they are in the same room, say if me and you, something happened and we're in the same room, I'm going to be looking over at you and like, Beth,
what can we do?
What can we do? Like, rope, can we get out of this? Like,
Yeah.
I'd be like, use your ring and saw through the rope. Like, I'll come
other.
and help you. You help me. Let's go back to back and try and untie each other.
Yeah.
And I feel like if he'd have fell asleep, Billy, in the same room, they could have then done
plotted.
something. Yeah.
But then equally, I think I'm going to sound so repetitive, but it's the control in terms of they're going to be worried about what's going on and not have any knowledge. So he's controlling that situation. He's the one that can say, oh, such and such is doing this, or such and such is, Arthur's playing up and being a bit of a pain. Don't do what he does. And they
can play them against each other.
Yeah, and they've actually got no knowledge of
Another
it.
form of control, isn't it? So they're all separated on the very first night. It says they were bound and gagged and took into separate rooms. So Jill was took into her own bedroom. Amy was in Sarah's bedroom. Richard was taken into the spare room. Sarah was actually taken to the annex to the grandparents' side.
Yeah.
And Arthur was taken into the lounge. So they are quite spread out within the house, aren't they, in general?
Yeah, definitely. And again, that would be so odd because especially in our house, you can hear what goes on in some rooms but not others.
Yeah.
So it's awful that Sarah is the furthest away
because they don't know if anything's happening.
Because you haven't got any, probably they wouldn't be able to hear at all what was going on.
Yeah, it must have been really scary. And then the first night that you're all held hostage in your own house, you're all separated from your family. Yeah. It's absolutely awful. So Jill didn't actually know how much time had passed at this point, but everything went really, really quiet. And Sarah had not been gagged. So he'd left Sarah. I don't know if it's because she was a child and he had a daughter, if there was something there.
Potentially.
He played on that a little bit later on. And everything went quiet. So they were thinking, has he gone? So Jill was upstairs thinking, he might have gone.
Yeah, it might be my
left
chance
us tied up so that we don't move for a little bit so that he's far away by the time they ring the police.
Yeah.
But Sarah actually shouted up, don't be fooled, Mom, he's still here.
Gosh.
And that's when he then took her right to the other side of the annex so no one could hear her. So he must have been in the vicinity of Sarah, but he was I think he was trying to make everyone think he'd left to see what they were going to do.
Again.
So Sarah obviously exposed him, and that's when she was moved straight away. So she's quite a clever little
definitely
10-year-old, isn't she?
Yeah.
So again, during this time, the phone rings. People ring up to check on the family. Richard's nephew actually rang him about a job, and they had to act normal on the phone. When the phone rang and they answered it, he would bring in whoever the phone was for, and they'd have to say whatever in front of him, and then that would be it. At one point, Amy managed to get free and come through into Jill's room. And Jill was like shaking her head, going, no, go back.
So dangerous.
And he came upstairs and caught her and put her back.
So again, he was kind of using whatever he had to hand, wasn't he? Because he'd not, I don't think, assumed that there would be 5 people in a house that he was trying to hijack. So weren't they being held with like the cord of a vacuum cleaner and then just washing line?
Yeah, he went round the house trying to find anything that he could possibly tie them up with. So it was, this part obviously wasn't planned, and he wouldn't have had time to go to the shop and get obviously rope or something to tie them in that amount of time. But Jill did actually hear a disturbance later on in the night, but again she didn't know how much time had passed, and it was her father Arthur who was in the lounge,
which I think was below, wasn't it?
It must have been below, yeah. And he was shouting, he was screaming, he was making some really weird sounds. And she thought, my dad is getting beat up.
God, yeah.
Yeah. And it just, she thought in her head though, he's strong. He's like the strongest person I know. You know, let's just get through this one night. Hopefully my dad will be okay. Like, because he is a strong person. And I think he was quite physically strong for his age as well. Yeah. And she said it just got quieter and quieter, and then it just stopped. Yeah. So she thought, right, he's finished for the night, and hopefully I'll check on my dad in the morning. Hopefully I'll get a chance to see him, and he will be all right. But yeah, to hear your dad getting beaten up from upstairs
and just be laid, not being able to
move at all.
So that was like the 12th, wasn't it? That was all of that.
Yeah, there's a little bit more on the 12th though. So Hughes actually, after all this, made everyone tea.
Oh, the cup of tea.
Yeah, cup of tea, yeah. When we say tea, we always mean cup of tea. Yeah. And brought the tea to everyone, and he brought the tea upstairs to Jill, and he took a gag out, he held the cup for her so she could drink it. But then, unfortunately, he did go on to sexually assault Jill, and she told him that, you know, she warned him and said, I'm on my period, and he then forced her to perform sex acts on him.
God.
So not only has she been through this whole ordeal, heard her dad getting beat up, she's separated from her daughter, she's worried about everyone, she'd then get sexually assaulted herself.
Horrendous.
Yeah, so it is absolutely awful. And after he's been in and he's done that to Jill, he did actually get quite violent and quite rough with her, and he bit her shoulder. But then afterwards, he got up and went into Richard's room.
Yeah.
And she could hear him talking to Richard and bragging about his crimes. He was saying like he'd killed 2 police dogs that were Alsatians, which were in fact not true. They were made up stories.
And wasn't he talking, like Jill said that he was talking to Richard as if like they'd just met in the pub and they were just having a chat, and he was like, oh, and then
just
I did this.
Bragging in the pub after a few beers.
But then, also just lying.
It's crazy. Yeah. Absolutely crazy. For her to listen to that thinking, you've just been in here and you've sexually assaulted me. Like, yeah, I don't know what goes through his mind, but we looking at it now, Richard is a big part of this because he was the person who was probably the most threatening to Billy. And it could be that he was talking to him all night and he didn't actually let him sleep because he wanted to tire him out.
Yes.
He wanted to keep him awake and keep him the weakest.
Tactical.
Yeah. So again, it could have been quite
yeah,
tactical.
I do think that Billy was probably more intelligent than people had given him credit for.
Yeah. Some of the time I think, some of the stuff is intelligent, and other things I think, why would you do that?
Oh, yeah, well, that's true. Yeah.
So we're going to move on to the police search now, and it was Chief Inspector Peter Howes who was actually leading the investigation, and he's the guy that had written the book that we spoke about earlier, which is called The Pottery Cottage Murders.
I pronounced it like horse. House. But are you saying house?
House.
House.
House, I think. It's
House.
Howse.
House.
I hope we're pronouncing it right. So we will put a link in the show notes to the book, because that is meant to be really good, and he's always stayed really respectful to the families. He didn't go and do TV shows on it and things like that. He just did one book, and he chose the author, really carefully, and he made sure that it was all
he just sounds
victims,
like an
basically.
incredible guy all round, doesn't he, really?
Yes, yeah, he was so respectful. And when you find out what he did at the end, it's even more, you get even more respect for the guy, don't you?
Yeah.
So the initial police search started off, they brought the police dogs out to the car, well, to the area where the police officers were thrown out of the car originally.
Yeah, so again, this is like 10 o'clock in the morning, isn't it? So all this has happened throughout the day, but if we go back to 10...
rewind to when the police first came out on their initial search. And they found the car that Billy Hughes had crashed and brought the police dogs to the car and thought, wonder if they could pick up his scent and then maybe follow him. The only problem with that is the car was actually covered in blood. Obviously, the officers had really bad injuries, and the police dogs weren't able to pick up a scent because of the overpowering scent of the blood.
They couldn't
in the car.
get the scent of Billy. They just had the scent of the blood.
Yeah, and then the other stuff that you'd look for in an investigation, like the footwear marks.
Yeah.
In that weather.
Yeah, you've got no chance. Because even if there were footwear marks, by the time the police had got there, they'd have been, with that amount of snow, they'd have been covered over already. Pretty instantly.
Yeah.
So they couldn't even tell direction, could they?
It's quite hard, isn't it, in terms of the weather? We always say this, don't they? When you've got a crime scene, you always have to work through things methodic. And if you're in the UK, it's usually going to rain on your crime scene, and you have to preserve the first things that you've got there. Yeah. In this case, there wasn't anything to preserve, was there, from this crime scene? They just had the witness statements from, obviously, the officers. But they did do a radius search for isolated properties in case he had gone and took refuge in one of the houses around. They actually searched 256 properties within the first few hours of the investigation.
Which is really incredible.
Really good.
Especially in those conditions.
Yeah, but Pottery Cottage was 200 yards north of the search barrier.
It's so frustrating.
Even though the search barrier was there, wouldn't you just look though and think, oh, that house is so close?
I know, but then if you do that,
then you go
just
to the next one.
So
but how when you found out that they were at Pottery Cottage, you'd be gutted, wouldn't you, that you didn't make the search, search.
Widen it. Yeah. But again, it all comes down to budget, doesn't it?
It does, yeah.
And they'll have only had a certain amount of time and a certain amount of budget.
And a certain amount of officers.
Yeah.
Something like this doesn't happen in that area very often. It's not like they are fully prepared for this. Like maybe a London police force might have been a bit more prepared.
Yeah.
So, with this one, they actually had 200 officers that they managed to get on the case and get out. And they were doing door-to-door searches. They were telling people that Hughes was dangerous, obviously not to approach him, not to try and talk to him or do anything. If you see him, you need to just report it straight away. Yeah. But by this point, they thought that he must have somehow got to a local house and be holding them hostage. So they were right on the money, weren't they, with this one? Yeah. They did sort of thought logically and thought, well, he's not gone to his ex-wife in Blackpool.
No, so
we can't see he's gone to the road, which means we didn't think he would have, but he has gone across the moors. So let's search the houses in this area, which I was looking on the map last night at this area, and it is so derelict. Yes. Like, not derelict, remote.
Yeah, remote, yeah.
It is so remote.
And the houses are just very sparse, aren't they? There's just a couple at a time.
Yeah.
And I think, again, that's why it's so frustrating. It's so tragic because all of this happened because what they think is when he came across the moorlands, Pottery Cottage would have literally probably been the first property that he saw.
Yeah.
So it was purely based on
the
where
location.
He'd have come out from the moors other than anything else.
Purely by chance as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
So now if we move on to January the 13th, so this is the second day that they are being held hostage, and it was the heavy snowfall that they'd seen in that area in 50 years. So you can imagine how bad it was.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think we get that bad snowfall now, but like looking back when we were younger, I always remember it being a lot more.
Yeah.
So even...
And we didn't have the resources then, did we, like you do now?
Yeah.
So if the conditions were bad, people did just avoid
avoid going out.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Hughes brought everyone tea and told Jill he was looking after the dogs. He'd, got everyone a cup of tea in the morning. The dogs had gone out and had food.
Again, it's really odd because you've got this dichotomy between what he did to Jill the previous night. She now knows what he's capable of.
Yeah.
But yet he's still...
And then he's feeding her dogs.
Yeah, he's still trying to maintain this air of...
Yeah.
Like responsibility and a level of calm. So for her, that must have been just such a screw with your head.
Yeah.
I was trying to swear.
I was thinking the same thing in my head. I was thinking, don't say it, don't say it. Yeah.
But yeah, because you've got these two sides of him and you just don't know when he's gonna
switch between the two. So he actually told Jill to get ready as usual, get in the shower, get ready how she would normally get ready in the morning. But at 7:30 a.m, a vehicle pulled up on the drive and Hughes was like, what the hell is this? Like, it's in the middle of a snowstorm. Why
are the people here?
Why is someone here? And then Jill actually remembered that she booked someone to come and empty the septic tank.
Yeah, and it's council workers, wasn't it? Council officers.
I can't believe they came out in that snow to empty the tank.
But equally, what are the chances? All of this case, you're just like, God, what is going to happen now? Yeah. Because again, with his violence, he could have just gone out there. It's pretty remote. Probably no one else would have seen. He could have just gone out there and killed them.
Yeah. So Jill was actually told to go out and act normal if that was actually possible. Yeah. And she tried to sign the paperwork so that they could just get the job done and go straight away. Yeah. And they said, no, we've got to come back afterwards because we need you to look at the job, check the job's been done basically, and then sign the paperwork. God. So she was thinking, oh, for God's sake, like...
One thing after another.
Yeah. And signing the paperwork, he was looking out of the window, so she knew that he was watching. But in that case, do you think you'd have...
written something on the notes? God, I don't know. It's so risky, isn't it?
It is, but if he was looking out of the window... surely is not close enough to see what you write. I would have probably signed it and then underneath in small letters...
like leave and then contact the police. Or...
I'd put leave and then help.
Right, yeah.
Leave ... help.
Yeah.
So then I'd give it them back and say, thank you very much. Yeah, have a nice day. Hope you get back safe.
Yeah.
Make a bit of small talk so he can look at it, digest it while you're still talking to him.
Yeah.
And then you can say, go. Like,
now I need help. Yeah.
Because in the middle of that conversation, she could have said, oh, have a nice day. And she could have said, go now. Like, still smiling.
Yeah.
That's, I think,
an air of
what I like
composure.
to think I would have tried to do.
Yeah, I know.
And this is fairly, well, I want to say early on, but they've been held captive for the night. And this is the early morning of the next day.
Yes.
So I feel like it would have been a good time to think, look, he said he was going to go last night. He's not gone. He stayed.
He's probably not sticking to his word.
Yeah, what are we going to do? So I don't know. Like we said, we can't really see. We can't say what we would do.
And I do think you would act differently if you were in the room with your family being held as opposed to when you're all kept separately. Yeah. I do think that was kind of a big part of it, really tactical.
Yeah, because if they was in the room together, right, and her mum, her dad and her husband had said, yes, write something on that paper.
Yeah.
Somehow communicate to her. You've got the backing of the family.
Yes.
And
you also know that if Billy then turns round to attack the family, you've got everyone there to protect Sarah.
Yeah.
You've got greater chance in numbers, haven't you? Whereas if she just does that on her own, you don't know who he's going to go for.
Yeah, it is a very difficult situation in general.
And wasn't it the case that as she was going to talk to the septic tank workers, she actually looked through one of the windows
into the lounge.
Noticed her dad, Arthur, looked like he wasn't moving and he'd been covered by a coat. So she wasn't sure then whether or not he was okay, post that beating that he'd received the night before.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think Billy said, oh, he's just sleeping and I've covered him with a coat because he was cold.
Yeah.
But I think she knew at that stage something was going on. And then as soon as she'd asked about her dad, Billy then moved her dad into the other side of the annex.
Yeah.
Away from everyone.
And he got quite defensive, didn't he, at that point?
Yeah. He actually made them all ring in sick as well to work. So
Yeah.
he brought them in one by one and said to Jill, "Oh, ring up your work and tell them you're sick. Ring up Sarah's school." And then he brought Richard in to ring himself in sick.
Yeah.
Which obviously is not to cause any concern.
Yeah.
But someone did actually ring back, one of Jill's friends, to
check
check
she
on
was
her,
okay.
to check she was okay. Oh, you're not in work today. Like, how are you? Like, you
Yeah.
all right? Do you need anything? Sort of thing. And Jill again just had to.
The amount that Jill had to pretend and get herself into a headspace where you would feel so much pressure not letting your family down, not wanting to risk any danger, but then equally you're dying to say something to someone.
Yeah.
It must have been awful. And I think Jill did kind of cop for the most mental manipulation.
Oh, yeah, she did. 100%. Yeah, Jill really went through it in this case, didn't she?
Yeah.
So everyone's rang in sick to work. And then he actually asked Jill if she would drive into Chesterfield to purchase some items for him.
Yeah.
So Jill was allowed, I think he'd sort of built up what he thought was some sort of bond with Jill, and Jill had maybe
Proved herself almost.
Almost like played along into what he to gain some trust so that she could have this like extra trust from him. So she did. She got in the car and she drove to Chesterfield. She picked up cigarettes, a newspaper. While she was there, she saw on the front page of the paper was Billy.
Oh, God.
Saying don't approach him, he's on the run, he's an escaped convict. So then she thought, oh, everything's told us is true because he's told us this.
Yes, of course.
And he said to her just before she left, don't do anything stupid, I've got your family.
Yeah.
So he almost threatened before she'd...
Yeah, because again, you think, can't you have left the paper at the till and kind of pointed or something? But when you have no awareness of whether or not your family are okay and you now know what he's capable of and that he's not lying, would you risk it? You just don't know unless you're in that situation.
You don't. I would like to think that in that situation, I would.
You would.
Have
Take
said
the
something.
risk.
I wouldn't have gone to the shop.
Okay.
So I wouldn't have gone to the shop to get the items.
Yeah.
I probably would have drove straight to the police station.
Yeah.
Then obviously had to get the items.
Yes.
Tell the police, but say like, I've got to return with these items within a certain amount of time.
Yeah.
So whatever you do, all my family's held hostage in there.
Yeah, make sure that
you could end up killing us all.
Yeah.
Like, make sure you do this properly, basically.
I think it depends on your level of trust with the police as well, doesn't it? You know, there are some people that have a lot more faith and trust in the police service than, like, we wouldn't have any qualms or any worries about going to the police and putting our faith in them.
Yeah.
I think in certain cases, people are a bit more hesitant.
Yeah, certain cases, and it depends on certain communities as well, where people are from, the area, the relationship those people have got with the police in that area that they live. And I suppose with us, I don't think it would be an issue at all. I feel like I would definitely be like, look, I need help. Almost,
you put your trust in
almost
them.
bossy.
Yeah.
you know, I need help. This is what you need to do. Like, not that I'm telling you how to do your job, but my family is at risk.
Yeah.
So, and I think we probably would be listened to. Yes. I don't think they'd have a choice if I was in that situation. But like we said, until we were actually in that situation, and hopefully we never will be, we wouldn't know exactly what we would do.
No.
So Jill's seen the headlines. She's not done anything. She's not told anyone, and she's actually returned home. So when she's returned home this time, Hughes actually asked her to cook for everyone. Yeah. So cook tea for everyone. Yeah.
A proper meal, he said, didn't he?
Yeah, let's have a proper meal. And I think, as far as I remember, some of them ate at the dinner table.
Yeah.
So Amy, Jill and Richard and Billy ate around the dinner table.
Yeah.
Arthur and Sarah were in the annex, so they were Billy kept taking the meals through to them, didn't I? And not let them come back through.
No, but the cups of tea, the food, he took them all.
Yeah, he made them in the kitchen and said, I'm going to take them through, but you three, because you're in this side of the house, you can eat together, sort of thing. So yeah, they actually had a proper meal. But at this point, Jill was thinking, has Sarah asked for anything? Because she had a few like home comforts that she liked. There was an elephant that she loved, like a little comfort blanket. She was a very clean, hygienic young girl, and she always wanted to have a fresh change of clothes every day. And Jill said to Billy, has Sarah not asked for anything? Like, she asked for clothes, she asked for this, she asked for that. And he sort of just brushed it off, but he did agree to take the stuff through for her.
Yeah.
So Jill thought, well, at least, you know, she's got it. She might not have asked because she's scared or something. And he came back through and said, I gave her the clean clothes. She was very thankful for them. And she asked me to turn around while she got changed. And Jill thought that's exactly what she would do.
Yeah.
Like, she would be like, well, don't look then, turn around.
Yeah.
So it sort of put her mind at rest. And she thought, well, you know, that is really something that she would do. So.
Yes. And she must have had a certain level of trust in Billy because she kept kind of questioning things, didn't she?
Yeah.
She asked about her dad. She was asking, you know, saying, oh, it is strange that Sarah hasn't asked for
stuff.
things.
Yeah.
But then again, he's coming back and saying, yeah, you were right. And she's all right. So don't worry about it.
So while Jill was able to take the have the meal with Richard, she actually told him about the sexual assaults that had been going on. Imagine how he must feel, like helpless, not being able to do anything
Completely
while his wife
helpless.
is in the next room.
Yeah.
Which I think would have
and
absolutely...
having not known about it either, being in that same house and not having known until your wife has to physically tell you.
Yeah. But then Billy actually convinced them all that night he was ready to leave. That was going to be it. That was going to be his night. Mm-hmm. But they just needed to pass time. So he actually got some playing cards out, got a bottle of whiskey out.
Yeah.
And I think because Jill had obviously gone through so much, you would need a whiskey to steady your nerves.
Yeah.
And I think all the others just thought,
played along.
Let's have whiskey.
Yeah.
And he was even teaching them how to play like a Chinese card game or something.
So obscure.
Just gone back to acting like...
everything was fine.
Yeah. So then that evening, in his preparation to leave, he did actually leave the house twice.
Yeah, again.
Which is weird.
All of these parts of this 3-day period are unbelievable.
Yeah.
We've had Gillian's been allowed to leave. We've had people come to the house.
Yeah.
And
Phone
now
calls.
he has left the property.
Yeah. So he left the property the first time and he took Jill and Richard with him and he wanted to do a test run. So this test run was to sort of find his way to the motorway.
Yeah.
And it was in Richard's car. He'd got a Chrysler.
Yeah.
And he heard on the radio that the search had been called off for him because of the weather. So Richard and Jill was like, this is a perfect time for you to leave because no one's looking.
Yeah.
Take the car.
Yeah.
Like, take what money there is in the house. Like, go.
Off you go.
Like, get away as far as you can from our family, which you would do, wouldn't you? Try and get them away from the family. But he came back.
Yeah.
And then the second time he decided to leave, he decided that someone owed him money in Sutton in Ashfield, which is a little bit further towards the Midlands, isn't it?
Yeah, again, it's another drive away. Yeah. It's not like...
It's crazy about a way to drive in the snow.
Yeah.
So he decided that this person owed him money, and in the early hours, he got Jill and said, right, you're coming with me. We're going to go and retrieve money off this person. So he actually put a wig on, disguised himself in a wig, and Jill got in the car and they started driving. This was a false claim that he was owed money.
Yeah, another lie.
Yeah, and they got to the cafe where his friend was meant to live above that asked him, that owed him money, and there was no cafe there anymore. So I don't know what all that was about.
No.
But anyway, they returned. He came back. He said he'd forgot paperwork. He did all sorts in between.
Yes.
When he'd left the house, he would make an excuse to come back to the house. And I think that he'd get so far on his journey and then he'd think...
get scared.
Oh, God, what if them in the house have got untied? And what if this has happened? And what if they've rang the police already? So he'd make an excuse to go back to check everything was all right in the house.
Yeah.
And then he'd set off out again.
Yeah.
Which is weird.
Because it was a map as well at one point, wasn't it? That he said that, we've got to go back because I've forgotten a map and I can't possibly.
Yeah. So this time was paperwork that he needed to get the money from his friend that was non-existent. So he was saying, like, I actually can't get the money without it, so we definitely need to go back for it. So they're now back in the house and there is another phone call and it was from one of Richard's friends, I think it was. And on the phone call, they said something like, there's a loony on the loose.
Right.
And Billy heard them say that and went mad. and started kicking off again, got a bit violent. And it was then down to Jill again, bless her, to calm him down and say, they don't know you, you know, they don't know who you are. They've just read what's in the paper. The papers have made it sound worse than what it is. Just calm down. We know you. And sort of done that, which then did end up calming him down. So yeah, Jill is just an absolute miracle worker in this situation, isn't she? So then they all go to bed, and that concludes the 13th of Jan. So now on to the morning of the 14th of January, Jill is to prepare breakfast for everyone yet again. So she gets up, she makes tea and toast for everyone. She does the usual, sends... Billy takes it through to her dad and to her daughter, and she's allowed to give it to her mum and to her husband. He then decides to send Richard and Jill out together alone to the shop to get more supplies. And this is in preparation for his escape for the third time. Or
again,
fourth time.
again.
So at this time now, he has let Richard and Jill go alone together, and he also gives them money that he has took from them and says, get Sarah something nice while you're there. So they actually went and bought Sarah a book while they were out and to give back to her. Yeah. And they thought that would cheer her up. So again, Jill and Richard are now in the car on their own, but they said for the first bit of the journey they were frozen. Yeah. Because they didn't know what to do. They didn't know what to say. They didn't know how to deal with the situation. And then Richard broke the silence and was like, right, this is it. We're going to the police. Yes. We are going to the police. We've got to do something. And Jill said, no, it's my family that are in there. It's my mum and dad that are in there. Yeah. And it's our daughter that is at risk. We're not going to the police. We're going to do what he asks. He's going to go and we're all going to be fine.
God, it'd be so difficult.
She managed to persuade Richard to obviously not go to
the police.
Not go to the police. So they got the items that they needed and returned to Pottery Cottage. So Hughes spent the afternoon preparing to leave, and he said everything was nearly ready, but he needed more money. Anyway, as Richard and Jill returned to Pottery Cottage, there was a note on the door that said, gone next door, Billy and Mom. Why is he calling her Mom for one? That would piss me off. Yeah. I'd be like, she's not your mum, she's my mum. She is my mum. Yeah. And gone next door. To where? Where have you gone?
Just as you do.
Yeah.
Just nip round to the neighbours.
Actually, we said Pottery Cottage was divided into 3 and they lived in 2, the Morans and the Mintons. Well, in the end, there was another family that lived there. Yeah. They're going to come a little bit more into the story soon. And it turned out that Amy used to clean for them, look after the animals while they were at work. And because Billy had obviously decided that he needed money, he thought, well, Amy's got a key. They're at work. Let's go and rob them.
Right.
So they went round and they didn't find anything in the house. Yeah. And then they came back empty-handed. But yeah, they tried to rob the neighbours as well, but there was obviously no money. No. So at this point, he's preparing a suitcase to leave. He's taking clothes from the people in the house, everything like fresh socks, fresh underwear, everything. And he actually gets Jill to cut the wig because at this time, remember like the late 70s, men could have long hair. It wasn't anything that's out of the ordinary, but the wig was apparently not great. It was a bit weird. Yeah. So Jill actually cut the wig for him and cut it in so that he could, he could look a bit better as a disguise.
My hands would be way too shaky to be.
Yeah, with the scissors, stab him with them. Yeah. And he said he still needed more money, and he actually took them to rob Richard's workplace, where he then found £250, which I think is the equivalent of £1,300 in nowadays money. Yeah,
so he did quite well.
He was quite happy with that. Yeah. And then finally, they all thought it was over, and he said, right, I'm leaving.
That's it.
But he packed a bag for Jill and said, you're coming with me. So again, Jill, she's dealt with so much throughout this, but she is then coming with him.
Because he basically says, I need a hostage, because if I get stopped by the police or anything as I'm on my exit, then I'm basically going to say, you're going to have to let me go because I've got Jill.
Yeah. So he gets Jill in the car and they start their escape. So they left Pottery Cottage, they drove a few miles down the road, and then this is where he insisted on returning because he forgot the map. Yeah. And Jill said to him, we can get the maps anywhere. Yeah. Like, we can pick maps up from somewhere else. We don't need to return to the house. Yeah. He wasn't having none of it, and they both returned back to the house. But he did say, you need to keep you need to stay in the car and I'm going to go into the house, keep the car running. And she said he was in there for quite a long amount of time and he was thinking, what the hell's going on here?
Yeah.
So she turned the engine off on the car. Eventually shouted out the window and said, I'll not be a minute. And he came out and he was dressed in another one of Richard's suits, a different suit to what he'd left.
Wow.
Yeah. So a proper suit that he'd got on here. But when he came back out, Jill had obviously turned the car off and the car wouldn't start again. I don't know if it's due to the snow or whatever. So they had to then go to the neighbour's house to then get them to help either tow the car or start the car.
Yeah.
So in the end house, which they'd already tried to rob, was Joyce and Len Newman. And when they came to the door and they saw Jill, they knew something was wrong.
Straight away.
She was acting funny and they said, where is Richard?
Like, they'd have been like, who is this?
Why wouldn't he help you start the car? And she said, oh, he's tied up in a chair, like casually.
Yeah.
And then she actually plucked up the courage to tell Len, it's the man from the moors. He's got my family. And she was like, help us for God's sake. So he had to help.
And he was a mechanic, wasn't he? So
this one wasn't a mechanic, but he was really like handy with a lot of stuff. And he'd actually got a bigger car, so he could could have towed them out.
Yeah.
So Len told Joyce, she heard what was going on as well.
Yeah.
And then he went into the garage and he thought, I'm going to have to arm myself with something. But he was going to go along with the plan and he thought, right, let's go along with it. And then we'll obviously get to the phone box because there wasn't phones in the house.
No.
They needed to then
go out
to get to a phone box. And they actually decided that they were going to get help for this family, but they needed to keep it under wraps. Anyway, just as Jill went back to the car, the front door of Pottery Cottage flung open and Amy was stood there covered in blood. And it was coming from her neck and she was holding a wound.
Yeah.
Obviously, everyone was shocked.
She'd climbed out of the window as well, hadn't she?
Yeah.
Or was it the door?
I think it was the front door that she'd come out of, but the window upstairs was still open.
Yeah.
It was a really weird situation. She staggered outside, but Billy said to Jill, you stay in the car. He ran back to Amy and dragged her around the back of the house. And they were like, what the hell's going on? Like, she knew her mum was injured and he'd basically left her around the back of the house in the snow. And at this point, Len and Joyce had just decided to jump in their car and speed past the car they were meant to be helping and turn onto the road. And I think at the time, Jill probably thought, are they leaving me? What are they doing?
Yeah.
Like, what is happening? But they were actually going to get help. And they went to the nearest phone box and alerted the police. So the police are alerted at this point, but Jill still doesn't know this. So now Jill's just seen her mum in the state that she has, but Billy drags her out of the car and makes her start moving on foot. So they start off on foot and get to the next nearest neighbour's house, which we don't even know how far away this would be. He was called Ronald Frost and he was actually a mechanic.
He was the mechanic.
So it's perfect. Yeah. Like, the car's broke, they need a mechanic. He knew something wasn't right and he delayed fixing the car. So he was saying, like, I just need to get this, just need to get that. Yeah. And his wife, Madge, actually had a phone. So she went in the house and she rang the police from the house.
Which again was really clever because he thought, if I can prolong this and she contacts the police, then they can get straight here and kind of put everything to...
When Ronald couldn't delay the situation anymore, the engine was fixed and they sped away towards like Baslow Way. So at this point, the police have obviously been alerted and they went to Pottery Cottage. Obviously, Jill and Billy have gone because they're now driving away. The officers searched around the outside of the property and found Amy's body in the snow.
Yeah. So tragic. And an old... You just can't even imagine an older lady severely attacked, dying on her own in the snow.
It's horrible, absolutely
in her own home, isn't it?
So then they entered Pottery Cottage, which was then to become the crime scene. And the bodies of Richard, Sarah and Arthur were found inside. So he'd killed everyone. Richard was still got his hands tied behind his back and he was face down, but he had actually nearly managed to break free.
God.
Sarah was on her grandparents' bedroom floor.
Yeah.
And Arthur was covered with a coat.
And Sarah was in a fetal position as well, wasn't she?
Honestly so sad.
Tragic.
Yeah, it's really sad. But the thing is, the evidence showed that when they estimated the time of death, that Arthur and Sarah were actually killed either the evening of the 12th of January or the early hours of the 13th.
Yeah, so either on that first night
or the early hours of the morning. So it coincides with the beating that Arthur took.
Yes.
Where he will have died.
And
which is
potentially
also
when
really
Sarah
sad.
said, "Don't trust him, Mum."
Yeah, she might have got killed then.
But just horrendous, because again, it's this manipulation and it's the fact that he has just consistently lied to Gillian.
Yeah, it's awful. And when we're looking at like estimating the time of death, there's lots of different things that people can look at the crime scene. And death, a lot of people don't know, like death is not like an instant thing. It's a process. I wouldn't say like a slow process, but it's like your organs start shutting down.
Yeah, there's different stages.
Things start to happen. So you get your pala mortis first, which is like where the colour drains out. You have liver mortis. There's rigor mortis. There's like all these things that happen. So obviously the rigor mortis is when you get stiff. Yep. You've got the temperature of the body cooling, and then eventually the reason you can tell when someone's been moved is because of the liver mortis, where the lividity, so it's the blood in the body sinks to the gravity. So if someone is laid on the back, and the blood will all then go to the bottom half of their body. So the top part of the body will look pale, and the underneath will then be where all the blood settled.
Yeah.
And that sets in place so that if a body is moved after that is set, the blood will not then move again.
No, so you know.
If you've had someone that's died and they've been on the back, and then all of a sudden they're on the front, but the pooling and the blood is still in the back of the body, you'd be able to tell that they've been flipped over and they've been moved within that time. So there's a lot of different things that can be looked at to determine the time of death. And the entomology, you can also look at insects as well.
Yeah.
I don't know in those conditions, obviously indoors, being clothed, being covered in clothes. You've got the freezing cold weather outside. It would delay the insects. It would delay the insect infestation. So I'm not 100% sure how long it would take exactly for the insects to get there. So I don't think they would have been, specifically badly decomposed.
No.
Because the whole process would have been delayed due to the weather, the freezing conditions.
Yeah.
So the Chrysler was spotted on the A619 speeding through Derbyshire, and it actually went all the way to Cheshire. Yeah, such a long police chase, isn't it?
Yeah, horrendous. And multiple car police chase as well, wasn't it? It wasn't like there was just one set of officers. Yeah. It was a multiple. But then they were really strategic, weren't they? Yeah. In the actual closing of the chase.
Yeah, so a unmarked police car managed to cut in front, and it caused Hughes to swerve and hit a wall. But then he dragged Jill from the car and forced the officers to let them have his car, and said he would do something to Jill if they didn't. Yeah. And he wanted a working radio in the car. So the officers got out, obviously didn't have a choice because Jill's life was at risk. Yeah. And they jumped in the police car and sped off again. So,
and again, our officers, especially at this time, they're not armed. We don't have armed officers, do we? Unless we've got the firearms.
Unless we need it.
Yeah. Yeah. So they would have just had to relent and let him have the vehicle.
Yeah. So when he'd got that new police car, he did the same again because the conditions on the road were absolutely treacherous, and he hit another wall and crashed that car as well.
They tactically placed a bus, I think, hadn't they? A single-decker bus.
As a roadblock.
As a roadblock, yeah. So as he's tried to swerve round it, then he's crashed again.
The wall, yeah.
And this is where it all kind of comes to an end now, isn't it?
Yeah, so Chief Inspector Peter Howes that we spoke about before, he was there on the scene, and he actually came to the car to negotiate with Billy. So he was the negotiator, and the negotiations took place for nearly an hour. And Billy was saying, I want another car, I want a getaway car, like, give us the getaway car.
Yeah.
And Peter Howes actually offered himself as an alternate hostage.
Yeah.
Like, this guy, honestly.
But Gillian, at that point, was just frozen with fear, wasn't she?
She decided not to move.
Yeah, she didn't know what to do for the best.
Yeah.
And so she just stayed where she was.
So because Jill wasn't moving or didn't get out of the car, Billy Hughes actually snapped and swung an axe towards Jill. And Peter's reflexes in this situation, he jumped through the car, the back of the car, and actually shielded Jill from getting the full hit of the axe. And luckily, it was the blunt side of the axe that went down and caused injury to Jill and Peter, not the other side. Because if it did the side on it, it got horrendous. The side of Jill's head.
I'm going to say, it was like all of her forehead, wasn't it?
It would have been horrendous. But Peter, just to jump in, his reflexes is just crazy. And within that time, we're saying that our police officers weren't armed, but we did have firearms officers on the scene here. Yeah. So it was Frank Pell fired a shot, and it deflected off of Hughes' skull. And he then struck Peter on the arm with the axe.
But it's like something out of a film.
Even though it went on his skull, he was still wielding the axe around. So another officer, Alan Nichols, actually had to fire another further 3 shots, which resulted in the death of Billy Hughes. So that's where everything sort of finally came to an end and concluded. But, I mean, we say it's the end of the case, but we've got to think of the aftermath. Jill was taken to hospital and she was sedated, obviously, because of everything she'd been through. But when she came round the next day, she was then told that her family, she'd lost all her family. Every person in her family has died. She's the only person that has survived. She had to go to counselling. It took her a long time to, you can't even say get over that situation.
I'm going to say,
how would you get over that situation?
How do you come to terms with something like that?
Yeah, so later on, she did actually remarry. Which is quite nice to hear that she's managed to, sort of
regain
be happy and regain trust in someone after what she's been through. She actually married the son of one of Richard's foster sisters, who were much older. So when we say the son, it makes it sound like she's married,
younger,
like someone really young,
wasn't.
but they were actually the same age.
Yeah.
And they went on to have a daughter, and they called her Jane Sarah as a little tribute to Sarah, who unfortunately lost her life.
And she insisted on going to meet the chief inspector, didn't she, to thank him?
Yes.
Which I think is really beautiful.
And we can't give him enough credit in this case, can we, really, for what he did and how he stayed respectful to the family, to Jill throughout writing the book and everything. I think it's a really good thing to listen to, and you get his perspective on things as well from the book, which is really nice.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Okay, so that is another case wrapped up for us, isn't it? Our second case done. I know this is going to be a bit of a long episode for you, but we hope you've liked the information that we've given you in this. And it's hard to say. We don't like saying you've enjoyed the case, but when you've got an interest in it, it's something to learn about, isn't it? And learn about a new case. So we are on all social media. We've got our YouTube up and running. We've got our TikToks, our Instagram. What else have we got? Facebook page. You did a Facebook page for us. Yeah. So we've make sure you're following us all on those. Make sure you download the episodes as well. If you're listening to us on audio, on Spotify, on Amazon, wherever you listen to podcasts, make sure you're pressing that download button. And if you like listening to us, please leave us a review, preferably 5 stars if possible. Yeah, we haven't got our first review yet, I don't think. So we're waiting for our first one. Come on, who's going to give us our first review?
Although we are filming this as the second one's just gone out, so we'll give them some chance. Yeah,
we're filming this 2 weeks in, and this is going to be released 4 weeks in. So there's still a bit of time, but we need our first review, don't we? So that is it for today, and we'll be back again, and we'll see you next week.
Take care.